Happy Sunday, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. Thank you so much for choosing to watch this video. I actually filmed this yesterday in time for today, but I completely lost most of the audio. It kind of was doing those old kung fu movie things where it's the voice goes out first and then the mouth moves second. I don't know. That's never happened to me. But anyways, I'm really happy that I'm finally able to do one of these long form videos for you. I haven't done one on my channel in a while, but I really hope that the shorts I've been posting helps you to keep updated on, my experience in the tiny house, living in the tiny house. And I really want to continue to be present on this channel, even if I don't have the time to film one of these. I'm actually literally headed out the door on a family trip with my family in like an maybe like half an hour. But I really wanted to get this video out for you. And in today's video, I wanted to share with you some of the misconceptions versus realities about tiny house living. I've been living in my tiny house for a little bit more than 5 months now. I can't even believe that, almost half a year. And there are a lot of questions that have come up with, people who meet me on the street, because I live in Belize, and Belize is quite small. So people are, especially people who are looking to build a home, they ask questions about, the tiny house option. I get comments on my channel. And so I thought in this video, I could share with you clear up a few things about tiny house living. So let's get right into this video. All right, so the first misconception is about the size of my tiny house. And in this video, I'm going to be referring mostly to my tiny house and then a little bit about tiny houses in general. So I get this comment a lot, your house doesn't look tiny. It's not a tiny house. It's quite large. It looks huge. And my friends tease me out in the very beginning when my friends, saw my house. They're like, oh, that's a huge tiny house, or that's a little big tiny house. And to be honest, when I get when at the very beginning, when I got comments like those, it slightly was kind of annoying because it felt like they were invalidating my experience, building a tiny house. Now that I'm, in the tiny house and I'm reflecting on it, I can see why people would think that, especially because my tiny house isn't a traditional size tiny house. It's L-shaped. It's very long. It's 10 feet wide. It's very high ceilings, 12 feet high ceilings. So it doesn't have a loft. So there are a lot of things about my tiny house that isn't traditionally tiny house. And I also think that some of the comments are based on the fact that a lot of persons aren't familiar with the tiny house concept, especially in the Caribbean. We are very used to chattel houses and smaller houses. I won't get into the history of that, but that's quite common. So having a tiny house like this, where it still feels very spacious, it still feels comfortable, I can see why people think that it's not tiny, but that's definitely a misconception. So just because you live in a tiny house doesn't mean that it's not livable. Doesn't mean that it's not functional. Doesn't mean that it's not spacious. It's just condensing the amount of space that you use in order to have a home. And so my tiny house, I can tell you, in comparison to a traditional size house, it's very much so smaller. 5 people definitely could not live in my home. Maybe if I, get married and my husband comes to live with me, 2 people can live in here plus my 2 dogs, but definitely not 5 people. So I think the misconception about size is that when you think tiny, you think cramped, you think small, you think cluttered, and it's really not. Tiny house living is just modifying, but still incorporating functionality and livability. Okay, so the second misconception that I had, and this is something that I had as well as I think that people kind of have about tiny house living, is that your cost of living will significantly decrease. And that's not necessarily the case, because you'll still have, especially if you're on the grid, you'll still have your same bill obligations every month. Like for now, I still pay light, I still pay water, I pay for an internet bill, I pay my mortgage, I pay property tax, and I also pay a homeowners association fee. And now that last fee depends on where you buy, but because of the area that I'm in, that fee is incorporated. Even though my bills are slightly less, I mostly attribute that to the fact that I live alone. it's just me and my dogs. I'm gonna put some numbers here so that you can see the cost breakdown of what it costs to live in the tiny home in terms of bills. But I definitely no longer associate tiny house living with tiny cost of living. It's not the same. It's very two different things. So the third misconception that people might have is in terms of maintenance. When you think about a tiny house, you think it's very low maintenance because it's not a lot of space. It's more compact, more condensed. But I find, especially having two dogs, tiny house living, you notice clutter and you notice dirt much more. And because I am quite visual, if I see clutter, if I see dust, and I live in a rural area, so there's also a lot of dust, there's a lot of outside indoors. I try not to wear shoes in the house, but I have dogs and they go outside and they come back inside with their little dirty paws. My two dogs, they don't shed very much. Actually, Ivy doesn't shed at all. She's a Maltipoo, so her hair doesn't get everywhere. But Moon is mixed with Schnauzer, and he sheds. His hair gets everywhere. So I find that the maintenance of the inside in terms of cleaning is quite a lot. You notice clutter, and if you like to see, I like a clear space because it makes my mind feel clear. So you notice that. So I tend to clean quite often, even the outside. So maintaining the yard, because a lot of tiny house living is incorporating outside and inside so that there is that feel of having more than enough space. So I'm outside a lot. I love being outside. I love being on my deck. And so maintaining the deck, keeping it clean, keeping the yard clean, making sure there are no weeds, no brushes, that takes quite a bit of effort. Even the siding of my home, I have white corrugated metal siding. So anything that splatters on it, it shows, whether that's, if it rains and the mud flies up a little bit and comes on the side, or I have lights on the back deck so that, it's not dark back there at night if I have to go outside. The flies are attracted to it and sometimes they stick on the wall. So all of that you need to power wash quite often, especially if you're kind of a neat freak. I'm not a neat freak, but because this is my space, I tend to want to keep it a lot more clean and a lot more maintained. So yeah, tiny house and low maintenance are not necessarily the same. They're mutually exclusive. And the final misconception that I found, and this is more so other people rather than myself, because I planned for this. A lot of people, I get the comment, oh, you're really brave. Oh, that's so brave of you to live in that space all by yourself, da da da. You don't have burglar bars. Don't you feel unsafe? A tiny house would be more susceptible because it's a smaller space to break into. But that's not necessarily the case, and I'll tell you why. When I designed this house with my architect and with my contractor, I didn't want to have burglar bars, and I didn't want to make my house feel like I'm in a bunker. And so that's why my windows and doors were so expensive. I made sure that they are impact resistant and they're shatterproof. The glass is shatterproof. So meaning that if someone took a hammer to it, it might crack, but it wouldn't break, it wouldn't come through. Somebody wouldn't be able to get through the windows just by hitting on they wouldn't be able to penetrate the windows like that. And also, in terms of natural disasters, a lot of people ask about whether it would hold up against hurricanes or natural disasters, earthquakes. I live in Belize, so we do have a hurricane season from June to November. Actually, last November, we had a Category 1 hurricane, Lisa. I laugh because my mom's name is Lisa. And that hurricane it did quite a bit of damage. In my parents' yard, they had a mango tree that had been there for decades, completely uprooted. And I was staying at my parents' house because, it was I hadn't moved into the tiny house as yet. But when I came to check on the house, it was completely fine. Like there was none of the boards from the deck lifted up, none of the siding came off, the roof was intact, the windows were fine. I had one small crack in a panel of one of the doors, and that's because the door wasn't properly locked, so the wind blew it open and it cracked the door. A very, very faint crack. You might not even be able to see it in this clip that I'm showing, but that was it. And that's because my tiny house with my architect was designed to withstand up to a hurricane 3 category, category 3 hurricane.
In the beginning, yeah.
When you work with your architect, when you work with people who know what they're doing and your contractor, you can design your house and build it in a way in order to withstand a hurricane. In terms of earthquake, we don't get earthquakes in Belize, but we get tremors because Mexico gets earthquake, Guatemala gets earthquakes, sometimes in other parts of Central America. But again, because I have the kind of foundation, I have an isolate based foundation. I think that's the term. I'll insert the correct one when if I say that wrong. That allows my house to be stable, and also it's built on 15 loads of filled land. Like that, I prepared the land in order to be completely firm and the ground to be completely stable, so in case of natural disasters I'm still good. And I did all that because I do plan on living in the tiny house for the rest of my life. This is my forever home, and unless I get married and my partner doesn't want to live here, even if I rent it out, I want this space to be safe. And so it's safe in terms of invasion proof, robbery proof, as well as natural disaster proof. And I love that you have those options even with a tiny house. So yeah, those are the most common misconceptions that I've come across, people asking me questions, misconceptions that I've kind of eradicated as I've been living in the tiny house. And so yeah, I'm really, it's been, like I said, 5 months, and I'm really enjoying being in the space, coming home to my tiny house and decorating it. And my dogs are quite comfortable. They love living here. If you have any other ideas on tiny house living or questions about building, I know that persons are really interested in the banking process. Let me know. I love hearing from you. I think home ownership is something that can be in your reach, even if it's a modified version of traditional home ownership, as long as you have a space to call your own at the end of the day. That's the goal. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next one.